Hi everyone, it's Stephanie Weaver. I'm here in the Blue and Yellow Kitchen with Microwave Boy on the camera, Daisy the Golden Retriever, and my special guest, Susannah Rodriguez Drissi. Welcome, Susannah! So glad to have you.
Hi, Stephanie. So excited to be with you.
And Susannah's beautiful novel is Until We're Fish. It's coming out in October. And tell us a little bit about, just very briefly about the novel, kind of the setting for the novel, and then you're going to tell us what I've made today.
So Until We're Fish is a novel that takes place in a small town in the outskirts of Havana. The small town is called Alta, and it's a place where I was born, the place I grew up until the early 1980s. And the novel takes place from the very beginning of the Cuban Revolution of 1959. So from 1959 all the way to what has been called a special period in times of peace, so the 1990s, that time after the collapse of the Soviet bloc, where Cuba was left on its own.
Okay, and what have you had me make today? Tell us about the dish.
So you will be making today something I really like and I think everyone has had, and that is ajiaco. And ajiaco is a Creole stew of meats and vegetables and spices from the Americas, Africa, and Europe. Really all of the encounters that have created Cuban culture. Of course, Cuba has a very rich cultural makeup, so we're also talking about even some Chinese influence and Lebanese influence. Mostly here, though, what we see is Europe and Africa and the Americas, and it was a Taino dish. So a dish that was native to the native people of the Caribbean islands.
Great.
And really probably, people like to say, the most Cuban of all Cuban dishes.
Fantastic. So, so just so you're kind of framed up for the audience, so this show's about culture and cooking, and so I had the amazing opportunity to make this dish before the show, because it actually takes quite a while. There's a lot of prep. There's 4 meats.
Oh, yeah.
There's a whole bunch of vegetables, and so you'll see the vegetables. We'll talk about them in a minute because it's vegetables I was not completely familiar with, so it was really fun, my experience, to get to try these things. But let's talk a little bit. You had mentioned when we talked before the show that in Cuban literature there's the tradition of a big meal, and sometimes that big meal is actually imaginary. And so that was really fascinating to me. And the other thing we wanted to share was the difference between literary fiction and genre fiction. So tell us about those two things, because your book is considered literary fiction.
Right. So in Cuban literature, going all the way back, I think, to maybe the 16th and 17th century, to our first epic poem, Espejo de Paciencia, or Mirrors, in the Patient Mirror, let's say. There's this tradition of describing, celebrating the abundance and the variety of food that may be found on the island, be it fruits or meats or vegetables, whatever it may be. And we're talking about a celebration that takes place in literary texts over a period of many centuries. And so in this case, I found it interesting for me to do something similar, but in this case with the lack of things. In other books, for example, you may see celebrating foods that are missing. So thinking about the items that are no longer found, and celebrating with replacements. In this case, we don't really see too much of the food. What we do see, and in the scene we're going to talk about in a little bit, is a scene that we will need to think about in terms of what comes before and what comes after. So before the Cuban Revolution of 1959 and after the Cuban Revolution of 1959. So you see the characters in the novel celebrating things that are very simple and basic items that, as Elio, the main character, will tell that the island giveth. And that is, for example, mango. And Cuba has a huge variety of mangoes, and in one of the scenes, we list them all.
Yes.
So
There's all these. Yes, the mangoes were. It's pretty amazing if you don't really think about fruit like this or vegetables to recognize that there's actually multiple kinds of mangoes. And again, like a lot of these root vegetables that we're going to be talking about in a moment. And the story is somewhat inspired by your life because you grew up in Bauta. You lived there until the 80s, so you lived through some of this period. And I also thought, that there was, for me, I thought it was the perfect pandemic novel, which I know when you were writing it, you had no idea that that's what was going to be happening this year. But because the people are dealing with all these shortages of soap and toilet paper, and they don't have a lot of stuff on the shelves, and a lot of times the days are sort of the same. And so, and there's also a feeling a bit of claustrophobia, and I think a lot of people are experiencing that now. So this seems like almost the perfect time for this book to come out because you're exploring a lot of those themes. Did you find that the pandemic has been difficult for you because of this experience you had in Cuba growing up there?
I think it's been a mixture. It has been both challenging and also very comfortable, and because it's familiar,
yes,
right? So if anyone's ready for a pandemic and shortages and lines and feeling claustrophobic, that's Cubans for sure.
Yes. You're experts.
So obviously I couldn't have predicted what we're living through, but I do see many of the things that we're feeling, many of the challenges that we're encountering, either when we stay in the house or when we leave our home and venture out to the market, is very, very similar. And it resonates with what I lived through, in particular beyond the shortages, because food in this case, and I think this theme that we're going to focus on emphasizes this. Food is not only that which nourishes the body, right? So if you get together with people to eat food so that you nourish your soul, and I think that's what we're missing now too.
Right.
But we're also something that we see in the novel, and that has to do with that quotidian nothingness, and the claustrophobia that you speak about, is the fact that we cannot make plans. We don't have any illusions. And if you remember from the novel, any of the characters who make it to the end, and let's not name names, but that make it to the end are characters who are able to imagine other realities, create new narratives for themselves, whether those narratives are successful or not.
Yes.
And so as we're stuck at home, we can't plan for travel, we can't plan for our children's summer, we're not sure what's going to happen with our kids' schools yet, or what's going to happen with our work or our business. Is it going to survive these times? It's very resonant with me, precisely because that is the problem of being isolated, enclosed in a space such as an island surrounded by water. We have no borders we can cross except the sea, right?
Correct.
And when you do, you encounter friend and foe. In the case of our character is foe. He encounters a shark.
Yes.
So for me, it's certainly what's happening now. I also Cubans are equipped with the ability to survive, and Elio, I think, encapsulates this kind of imaginary. He was one after another time, but he continues to imagine. He imagines the tallest bicycle on the island, and the fake jeans, and all of these things are failures, but the journey is what matters because it keeps them going.
Yes. And then Maria has a Sears catalog at the beginning of the novel.
Right.
And so she is captivated by the American lifestyle, and especially all these little phrases from the catalog. She sprinkles them throughout her life. So she has her own sort of beacon of the United States as, as a place of savior. And it's that commercialism. So you do see like the Schwinn bicycle, the Coca-Cola, which I've got on the counter here. These symbols of America are used very cleverly throughout the book to showcase this this distant future that they may never achieve, but that's the ideal that they're looking for. We do have a love triangle in there. There is an encounter with a shark. There's a revolution. There's a lot that goes on. And yet it is a literary novel, meaning it's about ideas and bigger themes. There's themes of water, there's themes of fish throughout, there's claustrophobia and monotony are almost characters in a way in the novel, which is very interesting to me because that's a challenge as a writer. And Susannah is a poet, so her prose is absolutely beautiful as well. So let's talk a little bit about all these amazing vegetables that are on my counter. So some are familiar. So we've got our ear of corn, and the stew starts, the ajiaco starts with the onion and pepper combo, which is pretty classic in Latin cooking. Then you get into some of these root vegetables. So we've got boniato, which I had to look up, and so where you would be able to find these would be a Latin market, or you can order them from a place like Melissa's Produce, and my friends at Melissa's Produce were kind enough to send me these ingredients so I didn't have to go to multiple markets searching for them, which I don't like to do during the pandemic. So boniato is a Cuban sweet potato. The sweet potato has traveled around the world and it now has all these different cultivars. So the boniato is the one that you'd find in Cuba. Tastes pretty much like a sweet potato, so nothing too unfamiliar there. Then we've got two vegetables that I had heard of, I've used in other forms, and had not ever seen in their raw, beautiful, original shape. So malanga, which looks like sort of like a hairy, kind of ugly sweet potato cousin, is also known as taro. So taro root is very much staple starch in the African continent. And so I didn't realize I was working with taro until I looked everything up. And so you trim off, basically you peel it the way you would a sweet potato. It was very helpful. I found a website that kind of took you through the steps of the stew. It's very slimy when you cut it open, so they recommended holding it with a paper towel, which was an excellent suggestion. But you basically are just dicing it up. And then the same with the yucca, which is much harder. And yucca has a couple of other names. You might have heard of cassava, you might have heard of manioc, and you might have heard of tapioca, aka tapioca pudding. So when it's powdered into a flour and then made into the pearls, that's the tapioca, that's the boba and boba tea. So these are all plants that have traveled around the world, and these starchy vegetables, especially when people don't have a lot of money, this is where that heft from in a stew will come from. And then we've got two kinds of plantains. So we've got the green plantain, which I'm holding up now, and the semi-ripe. And so I think the thing that people who aren't familiar with plantains assume is that, oh, it's just a big banana. It's related to banana. It doesn't really taste like banana. It's a starchier flavor. And generally these are, in this stew, they're just cut up and put in there. But I love them like sliced, kind of pounded, and then double fried. And there's a bunch of dishes that Susannah sent me that I was like, that's too labor intensive for this show, but that looks so delicious, and I'm going to have to find a Cuban restaurant and see if I can order some of these things. But super yummy. So yeah, so and then there's bacon, chicken, pork, and beef in this dish, as well as some canned tomatoes. So let me pull some up out of here so you can kind of see what it looks like. I will hold it up for the camera, and I think Susannah's already seen it and given me the thumbs up here, but I'm going to show it off to her again. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. So good.
Yeah. I'm going to, actually, I'll bring it closer to the camera so you
It
can
looks really good.
really see. How's that? Yep. So you can see it's, so the trickiest part of this was you're supposed to slice the corn on the cob into like 2-inch sections. I had to pull out my, it's not a machete, but it's it's a very large knife, and I was very concerned that I was going to cut myself. So when I post, I've adapted the recipe slightly just in terms of method. I would recommend, while it's not accurate, I would recommend cutting the kernels off the corn, just letting them cook. You can throw the cobs in because they will add flavor and thicken the stew up, and that way you don't have to deal with it. It's very hot, the cob. So it's really tough to eat like this, but how would you eat that? Do you pick it up with your hands? That was my biggest question.
So I just did it a few days ago because all our conversation about it really made me hungry. And so I did it, and I didn't have the corn on the cob. I had some, whatever I had left here, which was a can of, corn, and that's what I put in. Normally, though, I think honestly, for me, it's for looks. You see the wonderful golden rounds of corn in the stew, and it looks beautiful, but it's not very practical. So you pick it out with your spoon. I put it on the side of the plate, until it cools off, and then you can eat it. But yeah, absolutely, it comes out very, very hot.
Yes. So I will share the link to the original recipe, which is from a blog called 3 Guys from Miami. So you can see if you want to make it exactly the way they have. I've done a slightly lower sodium version, and I would just recommend, if I were to make this again, I would definitely cut the kernels off the cob. Throw the cobs in the pan because they will emit a lot of beautiful corn flavor and some additional starch, and that thickens the stew up. And then, so Susannah, why don't you go ahead and read our the passage that we've selected, which is where the 2 best friends, so we have a love triangle in the book. Elio and Pepe are both in love with Maria, and they're sitting on a roof, aren't they?
They are,
Okay.
and they have just, Pepe has never been, Elio has never been to Pepe's house.
Okay.
And he's always wanted to, and the scene right before it is the scene where they go knock down the mangoes and they nearly get caught. And then the following day, Elliot has convinced Pepe to let him come over to the house, and the boys go over to the roof, which a lot of kids do in Cuba. They sit on the roof to smoke and drink and that kind of thing. And at that time, a 13 or a 12-year-old smoking was not really something scandalous. And so this is what you see in the scene. And even though they're not necessarily celebrating with food, the cigarettes themselves, the music, which is Charlie Parker playing in the background, and the drink, which is rum and coke, Cuba Libre, and the smells of the Ajiaco in the air represent a kind of meal. The exuberance of which sort of melts with the kids' own youthful exuberance, I guess. So I'll read
Great.
a short passage. Yeah.
Great.
Next day, and just as Pepe had promised, Elio visited Pepe's house in Belica. It had been raining when Elio left his house, so although the rain had stopped by the time he arrived at Pepe's door, he was soaked. Just as he predicted, the house was nothing like his, not in the way that mattered. Pepe's house was hushed, peaceful, the kind of house you want to be going back to. The smell of rain clung to everything as he followed Pepe up a steel ladder to the roof. Pepe took an extension cord and his Vittorio record player, along with Sapolas and a small bottle of Havana Club, he'd hidden under his shirt. The smell of oregano drifted up to them, some kind of meat stew. They sat down on the rough concrete and leaned against an aluminum tank Pepe's parents used to collect rainwater, already warm with the heat of the sunlight. Pepe turned on the record clip. "Charlie Parker," he said. He then poured some cola from each bottle and fill the space remaining with Havana Club. Cuba Libre, he said, lifting his bottle up toward the clear skies. Charlie Parker's saxophone soared, enveloping everything. Cuba Libre, Edgar repeated, laughing, then taking a swig from the bottle. So much had already changed since the rebels first entered Havana a few months earlier that Cuba Libre seemed the only appropriate thing to say. What it might mean in the months to come, however, Emil couldn't be sure. For one, red tread bicycles behind storefront windows were now a thing of the past.
Very good. So, so I'm going to taste the stew. So this is the stew that probably was simmering on the stove. And as I said, it's got four kinds of meat and 4 or 5 kinds of starchy vegetables. And I did just a little squeeze of lime on top that adds that brightness. I think calling it a country stew is just such a perfect name for it because it has that just hearty kind of, well, my great boy likes to call it foods like this plunky, where they kind of hit your stomach and they really are very satisfying. It's full of flavor, not spicy. It's just a warm, hearty stew, and you could certainly make it, if you're vegetarian, you could certainly make it without the meat, or you could use less meats if you wish. But it really, for me, it was so fun to explore Cuba through Susannah's book, and then also to explore the culture through getting the recipe, finding these ingredients, and giving this a try. So, and so I did not know, because I was sort of wondering, well, how did they make these drinks? They're kids, they would just pour out the soda and just pour the rum in on top, which I'm not going to do because it's lunchtime. But I'm going to toast you, so we're going to clink here. And thank you so much for sharing your culture in this beautiful way. I'd encourage everybody, you can pre-order until we're fish, and we'll have a link in the comments. You can also check out all of Susannah's other work, SusannahRodriguezDrissi.com. Follow her, check her out. Please share this video if you know anybody who really loves to read and wants something different. One of the goals of this show is to showcase books that are not published by the big 5 publishers, so they maybe don't have a big marketing budget behind them, and also to really explore how culture and cooking come together. Susannah, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you all again soon in the Blue Nail Kitchen.
Thank you, Stephanie. It was a pleasure.
Bye.